Step number 2 is basically creating the parts of your world around the limited view of the player. So this would be the parts of your world that the player actually gets to go to and interact with.
Because as much as you might be awesome to go and create a world you want, the reality is they're only going to play this game in a certain setting, however big or small that setting is, and that's what you should focus on for world building.
I'd say, so I put down paragraph maximum. So for any single location, you should not be, in this step, you should not be putting a ton of details around. I would put just a basic setup of it. This is the castle where the princess lives. 0 lines with the Great, that's good enough. Good description. Connecting on a map. And I'd say when I say location, that can be kind of difficult because, for instance, I can say the castle, thank you, where the princess lives, but what if your whole game is only set in one castle? Well, then a location wouldn't be the castle because that's, the whole game. So, you obviously...
In that case, you might kind of leave that part out and not worry about it because then location kind of turns into
that would just be
design.
Yeah, that would just be the different parts of the castle, I guess. But
depending on if you're doing Rogue Legacy, maybe it's a bit different. I don't know how many people have played Rogue Legacy. It's a good game.
So, by the way, does anybody recognize this map?
Is it Legend of Zelda?
Which one?
The one with
Link Between Worlds?
The one with Link. Oh boy.
Link Between Worlds or Link to the
It's
Past?
not the CDI Zelda one.
Yeah.
Manage Cap?
No.
Link Between Worlds.
Yeah, I think it's Link Between Worlds, specifically.
Or the one I had.
No.
Is it Link to the Past? It doesn't look...
Is this Link Between Worlds or Link to the Past?
I don't know.
I mean, it's Link to the...
I think this is Link to the Past. You confused me with the name. Yes, I think it's Link to the Past. I'm pretty sure. Now I don't know. Now you guys are making me doubt
I
myself.
think it takes place in the same place.
Yeah, it's like the same map.
Yeah. It's Breath of the Wild. Just as good as it looked
Yeah.
20 years ago. Sure.
I think that's the 8-bit Zelda website.
Yeah. So, anyways, my last point here was your locations should be able to directly compare to a story outline if you write one. If you have a story outline of the different major events that happen in the game, you should be able to line up that a certain event happened at this location, and in your world building part, the location can, when you're writing this paragraph maximum description, you can reference to events that happen in the story, and you should be able to follow along fairly well in your story outline alongside your locations. So if you were making a Pokemon game, this is where you would determine towns, routes, and gyms. So basic locations that are going to be important to the player, and other things that don't fit those criteria, like boats and, I don't know, miscellaneous things. Yeah. So, yeah. Third step is the rest. So this is when you want to create the parts of your world that the player will know about or hear about, but not necessarily interact with. They won't necessarily go there or experience it themselves. You should still create these locations and these events. You just don't need to obviously put in as much attention to them as the places they are actually going to, for the most part. And then don't plan anything further. I put that there because if you are planning things in your game that the player will not experience, hear about, or know about, it doesn't exist. It basically just kind of doesn't exist. If the player can never hear about any of that,
unless you're J.K. Rowling,
or experience any of that,
and you tell people about it 10 years later.
Don't be J.K. Rowling.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Don't do it the way J.K. Rowling.
If the player is never going to deal with any of that, don't plan it out because it's not necessary and it's just a lot of wasted time, basically. So if you were making Skyrim, you can design the layout of the continent it's on. You can put in some of the details of Morrowind. This is assuming Morrowind. What's a game that hasn't been made? Because that was actually a game. That's a bad example. I can't pronounce that.
Elsewhere?
Blackmarsh. Can't mispronounce Blackmarsh, okay? If you can put information about Blackmarsh, you can plan some of Blackmarsh, but you should not be laying out where all of the towns in Blackmarsh should be and exactly how the coastline looks and any of that, because they're not going to be going there and they're not going to hear about any of that. So that's a waste of time. It's just not really, there's no point in doing it. Simple as that.
If someone's from Blackmarsh, you can just like come up with the name of a city and say they're from the city in Blackmarsh, and you don't even need a place where it is in Blackmarsh.
Yeah, you don't care where it is. You don't care what it looks like. If the player's never going to know that, it's not going to matter, basically. So if I were designing a Pokemon game and I was doing this step, this is where I would be determining maybe some of the other regions, if they're mentioned by other characters, or if they're relevant to the story. Any past events, I know Pokemon likes to do whichever legendary of this game created the world or something, that you can put in past things that have happened. Concurrent events is a big one here. So this is events that are happening right now, just not where the player is. So if there's something else going on the other side of your map with some other character in the story, that's something to consider as well, that the player's not going to be there for it, but you still need to plan it out.
Make a DLC.
We'll talk about that. Don't worry. So last step is to dive in. This is basically where you just want to start actually working on the details. This is where you can sit down and spend 48 hours planning out exactly a specific city and lay out all of the buildings and get into the nitty-gritty details. There is no specific good order to work in. You shouldn't necessarily work broad down to smaller areas or smaller areas to broad areas. It's just kind of, you tackle it at the best order you can. It depends from game to game of how it's structured.
Just make sure you are keeping in your scope, both in the sense that when you narrow down like where they are in your world, and also in the sense that if you're doing a fighting game or something, you don't need to go very in depth. But if you're doing an RPG, maybe you should be going really in depth. If you're doing World of Warcraft, you can go as deep as you want in all of this.
And don't forget, it's a lot easier to plan a bunch of details than it is to actually make and put in those details.
Yes.
Because it is really fun to create a super expansive world with a ton of stuff in it. But if you are a one-person team and you are working on this over the course of a year, maybe bring it down a little bit. Maybe try and actually plan for how much you can really do. Yes.
One thing that I would suggest is during the development process, it's a long process and can get tiring, that leave things for you to either expand on, that you know that you want to expand onto it, to get re-energized into your project.
Absolutely.
Your interest is one of the biggest things when developing alone, so keeping yourself interested in it is basically one of the main points that you need to work on while working on the game.
I was going to point out, this step, the dive in step, and also the rest step are things that oftentimes you come up with as you're going.
Or after you've already come up with other parts of the game. I mean,
Exactly.
it's
like if you are realizing that you're in the middle of a dialogue with a character and you decide you want to ask where they're from and you've never decided that before, you can just make that up right there and fill that in as you're creating that part of the game, rather than having to do it way ahead of time and plan out the entire world and all that kind of stuff. And you can create that new city or whatever that they're from. All right, this is a lot. This is what we're not going to cover because holy crap, world building is a big topic. But I want to point out that all of these things are things that you can consider when building a world.
and probably should.
And I would argue that you should look over all of these and then decide with each one of them whether or not it's something that you want to put into your game or if it's something that you don't need. For example, what food and drink different people in your game, or like different social classes in your game have, you might not need to go super in depth about that, and you might just say everyone eats bread or something, who cares? Or you might not even say that and not ever eat in your game.
There are people who farm somewhere.
Or you just eat wheels of cheese in half a second.
Yeah, while fighting a dragon.
Cheese.
You pause for a second against the dragon and eat 48 wheels of cheese.
There are all kinds of things that you can look at: geography, culture, history, classes or social classes, natural laws, technology, and you can go super in depth with each of them and really flesh out what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. And I would definitely, as one to definitely look at, culture is a big one that a lot of people kind of forget about in world building, that our culture is the way it is because of the situations people have been in throughout history, and that's why it developed that way. If you have a world that's very different from ours, its culture probably won't be super similar. So you can't just copy paste our whole culture over. You should think about how certain things would come to be and plan for those and put that kind of stuff.
Do you know that they have different gods per se in your game, and they, give people power and whatnot? You want to focus the culture so that it's more of a religious type of culture and whatnot, and their government might be different because of that, and all these other different things that are going on here can easily be changed because of that. Yeah.
So would you say that culture, you want to think of the history of your place to derive the current culture?
I would say that that's probably a good place to start, is to at least consider that when making your culture. Obviously, if you have a distinct idea of what the culture should be and you have a distinct idea of what the history should be, and they don't necessarily merge, you can finagle it and get it to work regardless. But I would definitely say that using the history as a basis for the culture is a good idea, because that is how culture is developed in real life.
Also, I just want to say that there's like 1,500 really great and interesting videos on YouTube for like world building in D&D. This is very similar, only in this you get to control what the players ask.
Yeah.
Control what the players get to know instead of them just throwing a curveball and you having to make something up.
Yeah. That's one of the beautiful things about video games.
Yeah.
The player can't just go in the other direction and you don't have to just improvise it.
Unless you forgot to, put a wall over there.
You can put
Then you don't improvise it, they just fall into an endless void. A little bit different.
No, there is a snowfall. You can't go down to Cyrodiil. You have to stay in Skyrim. No one can go down to Cyrodiil.
Exactly.
You're in an infinite blizzard.
All right. So, just some general tips that didn't really fit in the design process. Number one, show, don't tell. If you have an event or you have a location in your game, let the player experience it. Don't tell them how great it is. For any people who have played Dark Souls, nobody talks about how Anor Londo is the most beautiful, ridiculous place that you've been to, and that, oh my goodness, it will floor you, because the game does it. It just shows you it, and then you just say, oh wow, that's a very, whatever I just said, that list of things.
Wow,
It looks great, yada yada. Let the player actually experience that stuff. However, that's when it's applicable. If you have past events, do not get flashback syndrome, where you just show every flashback of previous events and what's going on right now and all of everything, because that's not very fun when you're constantly watch other people doing things that you can't actually participate in. Sometimes just getting snippets or reading it somewhere or having the tale told to you works just fine. You don't always have to show, but when you can, try to show as much as possible within reason.
And a lot of times that kind of stuff can kind of just happen like in dialogue. People can mention stuff like in passing, and you don't you might not make that connection right away, but if you come back and play again, you might realize, oh hey, this guy talked about this place that I go to later in the game, and said that there's this one guy that he fought in this one place that you then go and fight later. Just random little snippets like that can really add to the filling out your game.
Yep. Tip number 2, don't tell the player everything. Don't tell them everything explicitly, leave some things for them to figure out, and sometimes don't even give them all of the facts. Leave holes in your actual story for them to theorize about or try to figure out later. Give them the ability to function as human beings and figure out how things connect. Don't just tell them everything. It's a lot more fun when the player has the aha moment and realizes how two things are connected, rather than telling them, oh yeah, by the way, these two things are connected, okay, bye. Not nearly as interesting for the player.
And this is especially important for like story-driven games, because if the player already knows, what the whole world is, and they can, for example, if you pull up, the first time you played Breath of the Wild, if you were given a zoom-in map where it showed all the locations of all the different shrines and whatnot, that would not be anywhere near as fun as going out and finding all these different shrines and saying, oh, what's this? Rather than, and seeing these, like you said, the creatures, and being like, oh, what's that? It takes that fun out of it and just tells people up front, which is not a very enjoyable way to play a game.
And as an example of doing this well, I would argue Hollow Knight did this well. Yeah, I'm talking about Hollow Knight again. Because that game never actually explicitly tells you the overall story of how the world got to be the way it is. It just leaves a bunch of clues and little tidbits that the player can piece together and finally figure out, the general story of how this world came to be. And it's a great feeling because the player gets to figure it out, or just look up a video of somebody explaining it, which, let's face it, a lot of players do. But regardless, they are able to seek it out and find it out, rather than the game just saying, okay, you've played the game, all right, great, now here's the entire story.
Yeah. And also, a lot of your world building, these holes you can fill in like, don't necessarily want to say Easter egg, but like, not necessarily down the main path. Like a side quest might tell you a little bit more about the world and reward people for going on this side quest because of that, and letting them know more about what's going on. So it just kind of rewards players for that, and also builds off of that.
One thing that just dawned on me, there's a great example called Teslagram. There's no, I don't think there's any like text or words on it. It shows you through you playing as the main character, going from one place to another and adventuring through there. And then it also has basically little puppet shows. Like there's 3 different puppet shows in there, as well as one thing that I think a lot of games could add, which is story inside of their collectibles. There's a list of like 24 cards you can collect, which tell you the story as you collect them in this book of yours. So they have these different, basically mini challenges you can do to acquire a new card, which fills in one of 26 holes.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, there's also like a lot of games do it where when you kill a creature once, or after you kill them so many times, it'll tell you what the backstory on whatever creature you killed, and let you know like what all of its abilities do, but they don't give you that before fighting it for the first time. You have to beat it once, and then they let you know what it is. It's kind of like catching a Pokemon in, Pokemon.
In that, yeah.
Honestly, I was thinking about it for a second. But the Pokedex is a great way of showing that. Like, they don't tell you what all these different Pokemon are until you see them, and then once you see them, they still don't tell you all the information until you catch them, and then they let you in on these secrets and whatnot, reward you.
Witcher does that pretty well too.
Yeah.
So third tip is to leave holes to fill. different kind of hole. We were just talking about the holes that the player gets to fill, that they get to figure things out. This is holes that you as the developer can fill later or never, potentially never. For instance, the best way to explain this is to give an example. So you've got an RPG game, and one of your party members leaves for an in-game month. So in the game, they leave for a month, and they come back, and they don't explain where they went or what they did. They just come back, and they've got a brand new scar on their face that is a really big scar, and it's ooh, spooky. I wonder what happened to them. Great. You don't have to explain that. It's all right to leave that ambiguous, but by leaving a hole there for yourself, you can work into it later. If you are developing DLC for this game, or you are developing a sequel, this is something that you could reference later. This is something that you could build upon at some later time. This is something that the player is invested in, that they're interested in, that you can handle in something else. So it's totally fine and actually kind of recommended to leave a few holes in your game that you can then fill in with other things and reference later. And sometimes, even if you don't end up making a sequel, it's just an interesting hole that people can talk about and wonder what happened.
Definitely.
Tip number 4. Exactly, you got to give them some sort of fuel. Tip number 4, the player does not have to be present for every event and at every location every time something happens. There are plenty of instances where getting to hear about what's going on makes the world, in a game, makes the world feel alive. It makes it feel like the world is actually functioning whether you're there or not. When every single thing in the game is based around the player feels like they are at the center of the world. No, the world should be at the center of the world because it should be. That's how that works. Pretty sure. So having other things happen that the player can then hear about or read about or whatever can help make the world feel alive. It's just a really good way to help sell the fact that the world is alive. So, finally, when actually developing your game, you have to come up with, if you're doing a game with a story, this is assuming you have a game with any sort of story, you have to come up with your world, the story of your game, and the actual mechanics of your game. They do need to be able to play it. And there is no good best order for designing these 3 things in your game. A lot of games work in all sorts of different orders. I started writing them and then I was like, I don't want to write down all of them, so.
Like we were talking about, a lot of times you go back and forth between all of these. So saying one has to come first and then the other and then the other doesn't really make sense because like at some point, you know, some of your mechanics might be based off of your world or based off of your characters, and some of your characters you might come up with because of different mechanics you have and stuff like that. So I think they're all really good to piggyback off of each other and keep an open mind so that you can do that. Like you said, leave holes so that you can fill those in with cool stuff that mixes all 3 of these together, because when you can mix all 3 of these together, that's when your game really flows. That's when it feels natural and your player doesn't get taken out of your game because it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why is this person here? Why is this super sandy guy? And why is the Sandman in this island on the ocean? Like,
well, if he's on an island, it'd probably be a sandy island, so.
A rocky island on the ocean.
All right, yeah.
Sandman in the middle of New York City.
Exactly.
I mean, good question. I'd like to know.
Hey, why are you?
So example of a game doing this in a different order than a lot of the time is, can anybody guess what I'm going to say? It's Hollow Knight. It was Hollow Knight. The Hollow Knight developers actually did it in an interesting order where they created the mechanics of the game and created the map design and how the game would play out, and then built all of the lore and story from how the game actually played out. Or they built it in kind of an opposite order of a lot of a lot of people's design philosophy, where they come up with the story and background and then build the game from there. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. Just do it right. If you come up with the entire story first, and then you design your world, and then you design your mechanics, and the story you create is garbage, spoiler, the rest probably isn't going to be able to save it, because you're designing it based off of your story. And if your story is bad, the rest probably won't be super great. So just make sure that you do it right. Make sure that whichever one you're starting with, you actually put in the time, put in the planning, and develop it well, so that your other things actually have somewhere to go and
to
are done right.
that, make sure that they fit together, because it's very easy to, you know, add in mechanics that don't necessarily, or add in a story that doesn't necessarily match your world so much. If you have a prince, you know, on a tribal island, and it's like he's a prince from a far off place, well, that's kind of weird having a prince on an island alone when it's just tribal people around. So maybe, you know, you should make sure that he's set in a world where princes make sense in that world, or he's, you know, the son of a chieftain or something, and come up, make sure that they match together.
Sorry, I don't want to, I feel like but like I thought of, you want to make sure that the mechanics match make sense with the story. One famous example, I hope everyone's here heard of Final Fantasy VII, so I'm about to say spoilers. Why didn't they use a Phoenix down on her? I forgot her name, I'm sorry. And like that bothered people, and so you should try to like figure out things like that.
So they had a way where they have an item in the game where they can revive someone, and then there's someone that dies in the game.
Yeah, she died in the cutscene, so you're not allowed to revive her now.
No.
Even though she dies in battle all the time.
Yeah. That sounds like they created those mechanics and that story, but they didn't really get them to connect very well, because clearly that doesn't really make sense.
And we say all this, but at the same time, you can go ahead and throw in a cyborg samurai in feudal Japan, and no one cares, because your game is still awesome. So
Yeah.
just make sure your game works, I guess. Test, make sure people like it, make sure people don't get pissed about that part of your story.
So, now we want to give you an opportunity to sort of develop and create your own world. So, what do you think? Any groups or individual, or?
You guys know each other well enough. You can decide groups up to 4, or do it individually if you want.
So,
If you don't have a group and you want to be in a group, just let us know and we can find someone for you.
So we're gonna give you a few minutes to basically just try and nail down any sort of world. It doesn't have to be, we're not gonna give you some constraints or a theme or anything like that, but we want you to just come up with some of the ideas of it, come up with your single sentence description, definitely at least, and come up with some of the general rules of your world. And then afterwards, we're going to do something with them.
Yep.
So we'll give you time starting 5 minutes, starting right now. All right, time.
So he was actually really strong.
So,
And it's not too crazy this time, Jay.
all right. One group, please share the idea of your world. You guys look like you're really, really ready to share. Somebody go ahead.
Okay, we went around talking about like our favorite games, and that got nowhere. And then you were like, volcano, and we're all like, yes. So, this world takes place inside a volcano.
Okay.
And
It's like a
there's-
volcanic island.
Yeah, it's a volcanic island, but everyone's underground. So,
Because it's like an active volcano.
yep, it's always flowing,
Yeah.
and
and they have to like live underground because volcano. You know what I mean?
That was the best sentence I've ever heard. They gotta live underground because volcano, you know what I mean? Like,
Okay, but
because volcano. I love that. I love that.
Reasoning because volcano.
yeah, so also the volcano is the main fuel energy source for everyone. So it's like volcano. But right now, the people like living further down in the volcano are cutting off the supply of the lava for the people higher up. So like they're taking away all the power, and now there's a power struggle between the people that live further down, people that live higher up. So it's like volcano.
Lower people have all the power,
Yes.
and it's commentary and social struggle.
When the bottom finally rises up.
Okay, sweet. So now, as a club, let's try and come up with a game idea for it, mechanics-wise, and a story to fit it. So what do you think makes more sense to go with next in terms of this world has now been established?
Well, I have a question about the world.
Yeah.
Would being underground make sense if the surface is uninhabitable?
Because like they're okay. You got these people on the island, okay, and like we didn't really think about that idea, to be honest, but I mean, like, they're not going to be on the surface, you know, and I think it's pretty.
Maybe they evolve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't make sense and it just happens because it's their game.
If the player never goes to the surface and never hears anything of the surface, does the surface exist?
Maybe everything just plays
Asking the real questions over here.
plane of.
Yeah, we don't need a skybox.
Exactly.
So assuming that we ignore the surface, then with that assumption in mind, what do you think would make more sense for this game, developing a story or mechanics first? Any ideas? Well, you've got a world. We don't have any character. We don't have any. We don't have a character. We don't have any motivation for that character yet.
I'm thinking story because
I agree. I think story is much easier to jump into.
Because or like game type maybe, because some game types are not, it sounds like you have two giant clans, and I can see like two clans clashing, and you're controlling multiple people and not necessarily controlling a main character.
Maybe you have to choose a side, maybe.
But
I don't know. I think either could work for sure. Because, for instance, you could design mechanics around whether the character would be going down or up. So, assuming that they're going deeper, you would design mechanics with that in mind. If you were going upwards, you would design mechanics with like lava rising and doing things with that. So, I mean, it just works differently.
Well, another thing you could do with mechanics, so you could use the lava to like physics particles, and so you could use those to like, you could like ride them, you could like get shot from them, you could like, I don't know, I just thought like you could use the lava in like a lot of different ways that traditional platformers don't really use, like lizards.
Yeah, I think that sounds really interesting, actually.
Just touch the lava.
So maybe we do move upwards. That we are using this lava to power things and propel things as sort of a physics liquid, and the ability to use that.
Yeah, but since there's a limited amount of it, you can't use it too much.
Yeah. I like that. So if we have our world as the volcano, and we are using this as our mechanics, so assuming we're using this as our mechanics, we can then use that to drive the story. The way I'm thinking of the story is that it could be someone from the deeper levels that's been holding the power from the upper people, and maybe meets someone from those upper levels that is struggling and decides that they're going to make a difference and that they're going to try and give the lava back to the people up there. which is just a weird sentence because lava kills people, but they're going to try and bring the lava back up there to try and restore that and help those
Are we
people.
gonna talk about the fact that this is magma because it's still underground?
Hey, Minecraft doesn't see a difference. It's all lava.
Exactly.
True. This is Minecraft
Life
lava.
lessons from Minecraft.
Everything about bedrock is lava.
Don't worry about plugging it up and then it's like spurting out in different directions.
Don't worry about how liquids work or anything. Or trying to release lava underground in a small room is a bad idea. Don't worry about that.
Don't worry about the fact that your suit probably is going to melt.
Okay, but what if you're a person?
Probably.
I don't know how powered the suit is.
We're gonna ignore all of that and just assume that it works, and we're just gonna. It's good.
This is a part of the technology thing. Like, these people have been living here, and they wouldn't be living here if they didn't know how to, like, deal with lava and, like, you know.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shh. Yeah.
Like fantasy-based worlds, they could use lava to create things.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah, that it could be their power source, and they could also use it to actually create their technology and different things.
Kind of alchemy almost. You could almost like.
Yeah, I mean, if you're using for everything.
Yeah.
Food.
You can make anything out of lava. Wait, you don't have to cook it.
Talking about Pokemon that have lava cookies and Pokemon, you know what I mean?
That's-
you can just
Honestly, same.
Okay, is a lava cookie a cookie that's cooked, that's like baked with the heat of lava, or is it lava that's cooled and then you just eat it?
Also,
You turn lava into bread.
There was
And it's freshly cooked.
All right,
okay. You have the third generation Pokemon games. There was a treat called the lava cookie.
hogging all the water.
Yeah, the top people are hogging the water because it's like on the surface and they're like funneling it in.
And then the people on the bottom are holding the lava so they can't use power because they want the water.
Yeah.
And then it's like a stalemate. I like that. Then you could probably set the story as either way. In fact, you could probably set up a story where there's two main characters, one from each, and they both have those two different mechanics.
Lava boy and water?
Yes. That's a game.
I know.
Yes. Something like that, where you play as the water person getting the water there, and you play as the lava person getting the lava there, and then you have to play with both together to try and work together to
Maybe it's just the cold.
do all that. Just what? From what? Oh yeah. Water and fire is not a particularly uncommon mechanic, but hey, it sounds interesting. So
You get obsidian.
But you're in the volcano.
you get obsidian or smooth stone. Hello. Sometimes cobblestone.
Have you been playing?
Do you know your Minecraft lore?
Can't be created or destroyed, then why can I make a cobblestone generator?
Aether. Yeah, done.
I don't know.
The world is infinite. So
All right. I'm gonna cut it off there then, unless somebody else wants to share their world and we want to do this again. But it is 9:06, so probably a good time to just. I was in Florida for break. This is confusing. It's 8:06, still past the time, but not as past the time as yeah. Still past the time. So we're gonna stop now then. So reminders. We have a workshop this weekend of basic AI and Unity. Should be pretty interesting. Come check it out. If you'd like to show your game concept or idea at the beginning of the meeting, let one of us know and we'll give you some time to do it. And please pay for a shirt earlier than later, preferably by next week if you want to get your size for sure. Other than that, otherwise we wouldn't be able to guarantee your size because we have to order some finite amount, so we'll see. With that, go forth, make games, be awesome. Thanks, guys.
Nice catch.